My ex-boyfriend demanded half my house, claiming that I was successful because of him. When Ryan and I broke up after 3 years, it was actually peaceful. He cheated with his coworker, Brittany, and I told him to pack his stuff and leave. No drama, no begging, just done. We'd been living in the apartment that I'd bought before we met, so there was no messy lease situation. He moved in with Brittany immediately, and I changed my locks. For 6 months, I didn't hear from him at all, which was perfect because I was focused on my promotion to regional manager and saving for a house. I'd always wanted my own place with a yard and garage, something that was completely mine. When I finally bought a 3-bedroom house in a nice neighborhood, I posted one photo of me holding the keys. Nothing fancy, just celebrating my accomplishment. Ryan texted within an hour. First, it was congratulations, then questions about the neighborhood, and finally, a request for the number of bedrooms. I gave short answers, thinking he was just being polite. The next day, he showed up at my office during lunch wanting to see photos. He scrolled through my phone, looking at every room, asking about square footage, the mortgage rate, and how much I put down. He actually wrote down the address. I thought it was weird, but figured he was just curious about real estate since Brittany's apartment was apparently tiny. That weekend, I was painting my living room when Ryan walked in through my back door. I'd never given him the address, but he said it was public record. He started critiquing my paint choice, saying sage green would have been better than the blue I picked. He walked through my entire house like he owned it, testing doorknobs, checking water pressure, and measuring rooms with an app on his phone. When I asked what he was doing, he said he was helping me figure out the potential. He left after 2 hours of uninvited touring. Monday morning, I got a text from Ryan with a full spreadsheet of suggested improvements for my house. New fixtures, different landscaping, and converting the 3rd bedroom to an office. At the bottom, he'd calculated that these improvements would add $30,000 in value, and he wanted credit for his consulting. I ignored it, but he kept texting, saying we should discuss his finder's fee since he'd helped me realize I was ready to buy. He claimed our relationship had motivated me to save money, and without him, I'd still be renting. By Friday, he'd sent me an invoice for $3,000 in consulting fees. The next week, Ryan started showing up daily. He'd be sitting on my porch when I got home from work, saying he was checking on the house's security. He brought paint samples even though I'd already painted. He scheduled a contractor to give an estimate on finishing the basement without asking me. The contractor was confused when I sent him away. Ryan said I was being stubborn about accepting help. He started telling mutual friends that we were fixing up our house together. When people asked if we were back together, he'd say it was complicated, but we were working on a project. Brittany apparently had no idea he was at my house every day. 2 weeks into this, Ryan sent me a formal letter saying he was entitled to half my house's value. His reasoning was that he'd provided emotional support during our relationship that enabled my career success. He'd helped me understand what I wanted in a house by showing me what I didn't want in apartments. And now he was providing free consultation on improvements. He actually cited common law marriage even though we never lived together in a house I owned, and our state doesn't recognize it anyway. He wanted me to either pay him $40,000 or add him to the deed. I laughed until I realized he was serious. He'd already told his family I'd agreed to share the house with him. His mother called thanking me for being so mature about recognizing Ryan's contributions. His brother asked when Ryan was moving into his half. Ryan had even picked out which bedrooms would be his when he stayed there. The breaking point was when I came home to find Ryan inside my house with Brittany, giving her a tour. He'd copied my key during one of his visits. He was showing her the master bedroom, saying it would be theirs every other week. Brittany looked confused and asked why they'd be staying at my house. Ryan said it wasn't just my house, that he'd invested 3 years into our relationship, which built the foundation for my success. He said I owed him for the career advancement I'd gotten while we dated. Brittany asked if they'd been married. Ryan said marriage was just paper and real investment was emotional labor. That's when I told Brittany everything. How Ryan had cheated on me with her. How he'd lived in my apartment rent-free for 2 years. How I'd paid for his car repairs, his credit card debt, and his brother's wedding gift. How he'd been unemployed for 8 months and I'd covered everything. How the only reason I could afford this house was because I'd been saving the money I used to spend on Ryan. Brittany's face went white. Requested Reds is on Spotify now. Check out link in the description or comments. She stood there frozen for a second, her eyes locked on Ryan like she was seeing him for the first time. Then she spun toward him and her voice came out sharp and demanding. Is that all true? Did you really live off her for 2 years while she paid for everything? Ryan laughed, but it sounded forced and fake. He waved his hand like he was brushing away a fly. She's making it sound way worse than it was. We were in a relationship. That's what couples do. They help each other out. She's being dramatic about normal relationship stuff. I pulled my phone from my pocket and opened my banking app. My hands weren't even shaking anymore because I was done with his lies. I scrolled back to the dates when we were together and turned the screen toward Brittany. Here. Look at the dates and the amounts. Car repair for $1,200. Credit card payment for $800. His brother's wedding gift for $300 because Ryan said he'd pay me back. Groceries every single week. Rent that I paid alone for 8 months while he was unemployed. Brittany took my phone and started scrolling through the statements. Her face changed as she read each transaction. The confusion melted away and something harder took its place. She kept scrolling and I could see her doing the math in her head. This is thousands of dollars. You paid for everything. She looked up at Ryan and her expression was cold. You told me you were equal partners in that relationship. You said you both contributed to the household. Ryan reached for the phone, but Brittany pulled it away from him. She kept reading and her jaw got tighter with each swipe. Why have you been coming here every single day? You told me you were job hunting. You told me you were running errands and meeting with recruiters. Her voice got louder with each question. You've been at her house acting like you own half of it while lying to me about where you were? Ryan tried to grab her arm to pull her toward the door. His fingers wrapped around her elbow, but she yanked away so hard she stumbled backward. Don't touch me right now. She looked at me and I could see her eyes were wet, but she wasn't crying yet. I'm sorry. I had no idea he was doing this. I didn't know he was coming here or that he'd copied your key or any of it. I handed her a tissue from the box on my coffee table. I believe you. Ryan's really good at making things sound reasonable when they're actually crazy. It took me way too long to see it when we were together. Brittany nodded and wiped her eyes. She looked at Ryan again, and something in her expression had changed completely. I'm starting to understand what kind of person I've been living with. Ryan's whole body language shifted. He started pacing and his hands moved around while he talked. You're both overreacting to this whole thing. I just want what's fair for my emotional investment in our relationship. I supported her career growth. I gave her advice and motivation. That has value and I deserve compensation for it. Brittany's mouth actually dropped open. Emotional investment doesn't equal property ownership. Are you completely insane? You can't demand money from someone because you dated them. I walked to the kitchen and picked up my phone from the counter. I'm calling the police. You've been trespassing on my property, and you copied my key without permission. That's illegal. Ryan's face went pale and all the confidence drained out of him in about 2 seconds. He held up his hands like he was trying to calm down a wild animal. Okay, wait. Let's not get the police involved. I was just trying to help you with the house. Maybe I got a little carried away with the consulting stuff. We can work this out between us. Brittany was already walking toward the front door. She didn't even look back at him when she spoke. I'm leaving and you need to find somewhere else to stay tonight. I need time to think about all of this. The door opened and closed and she was gone. Ryan stood in the middle of my living room looking like someone had just told him his car got towed. He turned to me and tried to make his voice sound sorry. Look, I know I messed up. I've been under a lot of financial stress and I wasn't thinking clearly about any of this. Can we just talk about it? I dialed 911 and held the phone to my ear. The only thing I want to hear from you is the sound of you leaving my property and never coming back. The operator answered and I gave her my address. Ryan was already moving toward the door, but I kept talking to the dispatcher. My ex-boyfriend has been trespassing on my property. He copied my key without permission and has been entering my house when I'm not home. He's here right now and I want him removed. The operator asked if I was in immediate danger and I said no, but I wanted an officer to come document everything. She said someone would be there within 15 minutes. Ryan stopped at the door and looked back at me. You're really calling the cops on me? After everything we had together? I didn't answer him. I just stood there with my phone in my hand waiting for him to leave. He finally walked out and I locked the door behind him. Then I went to every door and window in the house, checking that they were all secure. My heart was pounding, but not from fear. It was from anger that had been building for weeks and finally had somewhere to go. The police car pulled up exactly 14 minutes after my call. I watched through the window as Ryan got out of his car parked on the street. He'd been sitting there the whole time waiting. The officer was a woman in her 40s with her hair pulled back tight. She walked up to my door and I let her in. I'm Officer Hall. You called about a trespassing situation? I showed her the formal letter Ryan had sent demanding half my house value. I showed her the text where he'd been coming by daily. I showed her the invoice he'd created for consulting fees. I explained about the copied key and how he'd been inside my house giving Brittany a tour like he had any right to be here. Officer Hall took notes on everything and asked for dates and times. Then she asked me to step outside so she could talk to Ryan. He was leaning against his car trying to look casual, but I could see his leg bouncing. The officer walked over to him and I watched from my porch. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I could see Ryan's hands moving while he talked. He kept pointing at my house and then at himself. The officer's expression didn't change at all. She just kept writing in her notebook. After about 5 minutes, Officer Hall walked back toward me. Ryan stayed by his car, arms crossed, staring at the ground. She came up the porch steps and asked if she could see the documentation I mentioned. I pulled up the formal letter on my phone, the one where Ryan demanded $40,000 or half ownership. She read through it carefully, zooming in on certain sections. Then I showed her the invoice for consulting fees and the spreadsheet of home improvements he'd sent. She took photos of everything with her own phone. She asked how Ryan got inside my house today, and I explained about the copied key. She wrote that down too. Then she asked if I had proof he'd been coming by daily without permission. I showed her text messages where he talked about checking my porch and bringing paint samples. I showed her the email from the contractor Ryan had contacted on my behalf. Officer Hall nodded slowly while she reviewed everything. She went back to Ryan's car and they talked for another few minutes. I watched him pull something from his pocket and hand it to her. She walked back to me holding a silver key. Ryan had given up the copy he made. Officer Hall handed it to me and said Ryan admitted to making a duplicate during one of his visits. She said that constituted illegal entry and I had every right to press charges if I wanted. I asked what would happen if I did. She explained he'd likely face misdemeanor trespassing charges and possibly breaking and entering depending on how the prosecutor viewed the copied key situation. I thought about it for a minute. Part of me wanted to press charges just to make sure he understood how serious this was. But another part of me just wanted him gone and out of my life completely. I told Officer Hall I didn't want to press charges right now, but I wanted everything documented in case he came back. She said that was smart and she'd file a full report with all the evidence I'd shown her. She gave me a case number and her business card. She said if Ryan showed up again, even once, I should call immediately, and they'd arrest him for violating the warning she was about to give him. She walked back to Ryan's car one more time. I couldn't hear what she said, but I saw Ryan's face go red. He got in his car and drove away without looking back at my house. Officer Hall came back up to the porch and suggested I change all my locks immediately since I couldn't be sure Ryan didn't make multiple copies. She also recommended I consider getting a restraining order if the harassment continued. She said the documentation I had would make it easy to get one approved. I thanked her and she left. I stood on my porch for a few minutes just breathing. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. It was pure anger mixed with relief. I went inside and locked the door, then checked every window and door in the house again. Everything was secure. I sat on my couch and stared at the key Ryan had been using to invade my space whenever he wanted. The idea of him walking through my house while I was at work made my skin crawl. I called Jillian right away. She answered on the second ring and I told her everything that had just happened. She said she was leaving work early and would be at my house in 30 minutes. I said she didn't need to do that, but she insisted. She told me to order food because we were going to spend the evening making sure I had everything documented properly. Jillian showed up 40 minutes later with 2 bottles of wine and a bag from the Thai place we both loved. She hugged me at the door and said she couldn't believe Ryan had actually copied my key. We sat at my kitchen table and I showed her everything on my phone. All the texts, the emails, the formal letter, the invoice, the spreadsheet. She took screenshots of things I hadn't thought to save. She created a folder on my laptop and we organized everything by date. She made a timeline starting from the day I posted the photo of my house keys all the way through today's police visit. Seeing it all laid out like that made me realize how much had happened in just a few weeks. Jillian pointed at the timeline and said this was clearly escalating. She said Ryan had gone from congratulations texts to breaking into my house in less than a month. She asked what I thought he'd do next if I didn't take legal action. I didn't have an answer because I honestly didn't know what Ryan was capable of anymore. The person I dated for 3 years wouldn't have done any of this, but the person who copied my key and gave his girlfriend a tour of my house was someone I didn't recognize. Jillian said her cousin Alyssa was a lawyer who specialized in property disputes and harassment cases. She pulled out her phone and texted Alyssa right there, explaining the situation in a long message. Alyssa responded within minutes saying she'd be happy to help and asking Jillian to have me send over all the documentation. Jillian forwarded me Alyssa's contact information, and I sent her an email with everything attached. We ate dinner and drank wine while waiting for a response. Jillian kept saying I'd done everything right by calling the police and documenting everything. She said most people would have just changed the locks and hoped the problem went away. But Ryan's formal letter demanding money showed this wasn't going to stop on its own. He actually believed he had a legal right to my property. That level of delusion required professional intervention. My phone buzzed around 8 that evening. Alyssa had responded to my email. She said she'd reviewed all the documentation, and this was clear-cut harassment with absolutely no legal basis for Ryan's claims. She said we had multiple options, including a restraining order, a cease and desist letter, and potentially a civil suit for harassment. She asked if I could meet the next afternoon to discuss everything in detail. I wrote back immediately saying yes, and she sent me her office address with an appointment time of 2. Jillian refilled our wine glasses and said she'd come with me to the meeting if I wanted. I told her I'd probably be fine, but I appreciated the offer. She said Alyssa was tough and wouldn't let Ryan get away with any of this nonsense. That made me feel better. Having someone on my side who knew exactly what legal options I had was a relief. The next morning, I called 3 different locksmith companies before I found one that could come out that same day. The guy who answered said he had an opening at 11 and could change all my locks and install a basic security system if I wanted. I said yes to everything. His name was Micah, and he showed up exactly at 11 carrying 2 big toolboxes. He was probably in his early 30s with a friendly face, and he apologized for what I was going through. I gave him the short version while he examined my doors. He said he saw this kind of thing more often than people would think. Ex-partners who wouldn't let go, family members who felt entitled to access, roommates who made copies without permission. He said the important thing was, I was taking action now before it got worse. He started with the front door, removing the old lock completely and installing a new deadbolt with a different key. He did the same for the back door and the side door that led to the garage. Then he showed me a basic security system with a doorbell camera and motion sensors. He said he could have it installed in about 2 hours. I agreed immediately. Micah worked steadily while I sat at my kitchen table responding to work emails. He mounted the doorbell camera so it had a clear view of my front porch and driveway. He put motion sensors on all the main floor windows and doors. He installed a small control panel by the front door and showed me how to arm and disarm the system. Then he pulled out his phone and downloaded an app that would let me access the camera feeds from anywhere. He walked through my house testing each sensor to make sure they all worked properly. He handed me 3 copies of my new house key and said I should keep one hidden outside in case of emergencies, but nowhere obvious like under a doormat. He suggested a magnetic key holder attached to the underside of my deck railing. I thanked him and paid his bill, which was less than I expected. He said to call if I had any problems with the system and left his business card. After Micah left, I sat on my couch and opened the security app on my phone. I could see my front porch in real time. I could scroll back through recorded footage from earlier that day. I could set up alerts for when motion was detected. It felt good knowing I'd have a record of anyone who came near my house. I went to my appointment with Alyssa at 2. Her office was in a nice building downtown with her name on the door. She was younger than I expected, maybe late 30s, with dark hair pulled back in a bun. She shook my hand firmly and invited me to sit. She had printed out all the documentation I'd sent, and it was spread across her desk. She went through each piece carefully, asking questions about dates and times and Ryan's exact words. She said I'd done an excellent job documenting everything, and that would make our case much stronger. She explained that we could file for a restraining order based on the trespassing and harassment pattern. She said the copied key and unauthorized entry into my home were particularly serious. She also said we could send Ryan a formal cease and desist letter demanding he stop all contact and abandon any claims to my property. If he violated either of those, we'd have grounds for a civil suit. That evening, my phone buzzed with a text from Ryan. I felt my stomach drop when I saw his name. The message said he knew I was upset, but could we please talk about this like adults? He said Brittany had kicked him out and he had nowhere to go. He said he'd made mistakes, but he really did care about me and just wanted what was fair. I stared at the message for a long time. Part of me felt bad that he was apparently homeless. But the bigger part of me remembered him walking through my house like he owned it, demanding money I didn't owe him, lying to his family about shared ownership. I took a screenshot of his message and texted it to Alyssa without responding to Ryan directly. She wrote back within minutes saying this was perfect evidence of continued contact after police involvement, and we should definitely proceed with the restraining order. I didn't respond to Ryan's text and instead forwarded everything to Alyssa, who called me back within 20 minutes. She said she'd draft a formal cease and desist letter that would go out via certified mail so we'd have legal proof he received it. The letter would demand he stop all contact with me and abandon any claims to my property. She said it would take her about a day to prepare everything properly and get it sent out. I thanked her and felt a little better knowing someone was handling this professionally. The next morning, I woke up thinking about all the paperwork from when I bought the house. I needed to gather proof that Ryan had nothing to do with the purchase. I found Taylor Hernandez's business card in my desk drawer and sent her an email explaining the situation. I asked if she could provide documentation showing I purchased the house solely in my name with no involvement from Ryan. She responded in less than an hour saying she'd pull all the paperwork from the transaction. By early afternoon, she'd sent over copies of every document, including the purchase agreement, mortgage application, title transfer, and closing statements. Every single page had only my name on it. Ryan wasn't mentioned anywhere in any capacity. I forwarded all of it to Alyssa and saved copies to 3 different places on my computer. That evening, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize, but the area code was local. I answered and heard Ryan's brother Hunter on the other end. His voice was tight and angry. He said Ryan told him I was refusing to honor an agreement we'd made about the house. He wanted to know why I was being so difficult when Ryan had invested so much in our relationship. I took a deep breath and explained calmly that there was never any agreement. I told him Ryan had been harassing me for weeks, showing up at my house uninvited, copying my key without permission, and making completely baseless claims about owning part of my property. Hunter was quiet for a moment, then said that didn't sound like what Ryan had told the family. I offered to send him copies of Ryan's demand letters and the police report from the trespassing incident. He gave me his email address, and I sent everything while we were still on the phone. I heard him clicking through the files, and his tone changed completely. He apologized and said he had no idea Ryan was behaving this way. He'd believed Ryan's story about us working together on the house improvements and planning to share the property. Then Hunter told me something that made my stomach turn. Ryan had been borrowing money from different family members over the past few weeks, claiming he needed it for house expenses. He told his mother he needed money for a down payment on renovations. He'd told Hunter he needed to cover property taxes. He'd apparently collected several $1,000s from various relatives using my house as the excuse. Hunter said he was going to talk to their mother immediately and set the record straight. He apologized again and hung up. The next day, Ryan's mother called me. Her voice was completely different from the thank you call she'd made weeks earlier. She apologized for believing Ryan's lies without checking with me first. She said the family was cutting him off financially until he got professional help. She sounded embarrassed and sad. She asked if there was anything she could do to make up for the trouble Ryan had caused. I told her I appreciated the apology and that I just wanted Ryan to leave me alone. She promised she'd make sure he understood the family wouldn't support his behavior anymore. 2 days later, I got a message request on social media from Brittany. She asked if we could meet for coffee. I stared at the message for a while, trying to decide if this was a good idea. Part of me wanted nothing to do with anyone connected to Ryan. But she'd seemed genuinely shocked when I told her the truth about our relationship, and maybe she had information that could help my case. I agreed to meet her at a coffee shop downtown the next afternoon. I got there first and ordered a tea while I waited. Brittany arrived right on time, looking tired and uncomfortable. We sat at a corner table away from other people. She started talking before I could say anything. She told me she'd broken up with Ryan 3 days after the incident at my house. She'd gone through his phone while he was sleeping and found my address saved with notes about room measurements and improvement costs. She'd also found search history showing he'd been looking at my house on real estate websites multiple times a day. She realized he'd been spending entire days at my house when he told her he was going to job interviews. She said she felt like an idiot for not seeing it sooner. Then she shared more details that made Ryan's situation even worse. He had significant credit card debt she didn't know about until she saw bills in his email. He'd been getting rejection letters from jobs because his references from previous employers were terrible. One company had called her apartment looking for him about an unpaid balance on his car insurance. She'd thought he was getting his life together, but he'd just been lying about everything. She said she felt foolish for believing his story about us sharing property ownership. I told her I understood and that Ryan was good at making people believe what he wanted them to believe. We talked for another 20 minutes, and by the end I actually felt a little sorry for her. She'd been lied to just like I had been, and just like Ryan's family had been. When we got up to leave, she promised she'd contact Alyssa if Ryan tried to use her as part of any legal strategy against me. She said she wanted to help make sure he faced consequences for what he'd done. We parted ways in the parking lot, and I drove home feeling like things were finally moving in the right direction. 2 days after meeting with Brittany, my phone rang while I was at work. Alyssa's name flashed on the screen, and I stepped into an empty conference room to take the call. She got straight to the point. Ryan had received the cease and desist letter she'd sent, but instead of backing off, he'd hired his own lawyer. His attorney sent a response letter claiming Ryan deserved money for the emotional support he provided during our relationship. I actually laughed out loud at the idea. Alyssa explained that Ryan's lawyer was arguing my career success happened because Ryan motivated me and gave me stability. The letter said I owed him for being a supportive partner who helped me grow professionally. I asked if this was actually a real legal argument someone could make. Alyssa laughed too and said it had zero basis in property law. No judge would take it seriously because emotional support during a relationship doesn't create financial obligations after the relationship ends. She recommended we move forward with filing for a restraining order to set clear legal boundaries. The cease and desist obviously wasn't enough to stop Ryan, so we needed the court to intervene. I agreed immediately, and we scheduled a meeting at her office for the next day to start the paperwork. The restraining order application took about an hour to complete. I had to document every incident of harassment starting from when Ryan first showed up at my house were uninvited. We included the trespassing incident where I found him inside with Brittany, the copied key he'd made without permission, his repeated unwanted visits, the fake consulting invoice, and his false claims to friends and family about shared ownership. Alyssa organized everything into a clear timeline that showed a pattern of escalating behavior. She said the pattern was important because it proved this wasn't just one misunderstanding, but ongoing harassment. We filed the application at the courthouse that afternoon. The clerk told us the hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks out, and Ryan would be served with notice within a few days. Alyssa explained that the notice would inform Ryan about the hearing date and warn him that a judge would decide whether to grant the restraining order. She said Ryan would probably show up with his lawyer to contest it, but our documentation was strong enough that she felt confident about the outcome. During those 2 weeks of waiting, I checked my security cameras constantly. 3 days after Ryan was served with the restraining order notice, the motion sensor alert went off on my phone. I pulled up the camera feed and saw Ryan's car driving slowly past my house. He didn't stop or get out, just cruised by at about 10 miles per hour. The next day it happened again, this time in the evening when it was getting dark. Then again 2 days later in the morning before I left for work. Each time I saved the footage and sent it to Alyssa. She said the drive-bys weren't technically violations since he wasn't coming onto my property, but they showed he was still fixated on the house. The footage would help our case by proving his obsessive behavior was continuing even after receiving legal notice to stop. By the end of the 2 weeks, I had video of Ryan driving past my house 8 different times. The pattern was obvious and creepy. He never stopped, never got out, just drove by slowly like he was checking on something that belonged to him. Jillian came over 3 nights before the hearing to help me prepare. She'd printed out all my documentation and organized it into categories. Demand letters in one pile, text messages in another, photos of the copied key, the contractor's confused email, everything laid out on my dining room table. She made me practice explaining each piece of evidence like I was talking to the judge. Every time I started getting emotional or angry, she stopped me and reminded me to stay calm and factual. The documentation would speak for itself, she said, so I just needed to present it clearly without letting Ryan's behavior make me lose my composure. We practiced for 2 hours until I could walk through the entire timeline without my voice shaking or my hands trembling. Jillian said I was ready, and that any judge would see Ryan's behavior for what it was. The courthouse was busy when I arrived with Alyssa on the morning of the hearing. We got there 30 minutes early to review everything one more time. Ryan showed up 15 minutes before the hearing was scheduled to start, walking in with a man in a suit who must have been his lawyer. Ryan looked terrible. His shirt was wrinkled and he had dark circles under his eyes like he hadn't been sleeping. His lawyer was talking to him in a low voice, probably going over their strategy. Ryan kept glancing at me and then looking away quickly. He seemed nervous and defeated, nothing like the confident person who'd walked through my house measuring rooms and making improvement plans. His lawyer approached Alyssa and introduced himself. They exchanged professional pleasantries while Ryan sat on a bench in the hallway staring at his phone. When our case was called, we all filed into the courtroom. The judge was a woman in her 50s who looked like she'd heard every excuse in the world. Ryan's lawyer went first, arguing that Ryan had just been trying to help an ex-girlfriend and got overly enthusiastic about home improvement projects. He painted Ryan as someone who cared too much and crossed some boundaries without realizing it. He said Ryan never meant any harm and had already learned his lesson from the police visit. The lawyer asked the judge to dismiss the restraining order request as unnecessary because Ryan would voluntarily stay away from now on. I could feel my jaw clenching as I listened to this version of events that made Ryan sound like a well-meaning friend instead of someone who'd been harassing me for weeks. Then it was my turn. Alyssa had me walk through the timeline chronologically while she presented each piece of evidence. I showed the judge the demand letters where Ryan claimed he deserved $40,000 or half ownership of my house. I explained how he'd copied my key without permission and entered my home when I wasn't there. I showed the email from the contractor Ryan had contacted to schedule work I never authorized. Then came the security footage of Ryan driving past my house 8 times in 2 weeks after being served with the restraining order notice. The judge watched each video clip carefully, her expression getting more serious with each one. Ryan sat completely silent the entire time, not looking at me or the judge, just staring at the table in front of him. His lawyer tried to interject a few times, but the judge held up her hand and told him she wanted to see all the evidence first. After I finished presenting everything, the judge took about 5 minutes to review the documents again. The courtroom was completely quiet except for the sound of papers rustling. Finally, she looked up at Ryan and asked if he had anything to say for himself. Ryan mumbled something about just wanting to help and not understanding boundaries. The judge cut him off and said she'd seen enough. She granted a 1-year restraining order prohibiting Ryan from coming within 500 feet of my home or workplace. She said the evidence showed a clear pattern of harassment and obsessive behavior that justified the order. Then she looked directly at Ryan and warned him that any violation would result in immediate arrest and potential jail time. She told him that driving past my house repeatedly was already pushing the boundaries and needed to stop immediately. Ryan nodded without making eye contact, and his lawyer put a hand on his shoulder. After the judge dismissed us, Ryan's lawyer pulled Alyssa aside in the hallway. I stood a few feet away watching them talk in low voices. Ryan had already left through a different exit without looking at me. His lawyer asked Alyssa if I would be willing to settle this matter without any further legal action. Alyssa glanced at me and I walked over to join the conversation. She told his lawyer we might consider it if Ryan signed a document forever releasing any claims to my property. The lawyer looked uncomfortable but said he'd discuss it with his client. Alyssa said we'd also want Ryan to pay my legal fees and the cost of the new locks and security system. The lawyer started to protest, but Alyssa reminded him that their case had no merit whatsoever, and we could pursue additional legal action if Ryan didn't agree to reasonable terms. I told Alyssa I was willing to settle on those conditions because I just wanted this to be over. I didn't want to drag this out for months with more court dates and legal fees. If Ryan would sign something saying he had no claim to my house and pay for the trouble he'd caused, I'd agree to end it there. Alyssa said she'd draft the settlement agreement and send it to Ryan's lawyer. The lawyer nodded reluctantly and said he'd recommend Ryan accept the terms. He knew they had no case, and fighting it would just cost Ryan more money he clearly didn't have. We all shook hands in that awkward way lawyers do, even when they've been on opposite sides, and then Alyssa and I walked out to the parking lot together. Within a week, Alyssa had everything finalized. Ryan signed the notarized document at his lawyer's office, and I wasn't even required to be there. The paper stated clearly that he had no ownership interest in my house, had never had any claim to it, and would never make such claims again. His signature looked shaky on the scan Alyssa sent me, like his hand was trembling when he wrote it. The $4,000 check arrived by certified mail 2 days later. I deposited it immediately and used part of it to pay Alyssa's final invoice. The rest went toward replacing my patio furniture since Ryan had sat on my porch so many times I couldn't look at those chairs without feeling annoyed. Hunter called me on a Tuesday afternoon while I was organizing files at work. He apologized again for believing Ryan's lies about the house. He sounded tired and a little embarrassed. He told me Ryan had moved back in with their parents after Brittany refused to take him back. Their mother had laid down strict rules including mandatory therapy sessions twice a week. Hunter said the family was making Ryan's continued residence contingent on him actually attending and participating. He thanked me for not making things worse than they already were, and said he hoped I could enjoy my house in peace now. I told him I appreciated the call and wished him well. At the office the next week, Jillian commented that I seemed different. She said I looked more relaxed and wasn't checking my phone constantly like I had been during the whole Ryan situation. Other coworkers noticed too. My supervisor mentioned during a project meeting that my focus had really improved. Jillian pulled me aside at lunch and suggested I throw a housewarming party to properly celebrate my house now that the drama was over. She said I deserved to actually enjoy the place instead of treating it like a fortress under siege. The idea sounded perfect. I'd bought the house months ago, but had never really gotten to share it with the people who mattered. That weekend, I sent out invitations to close friends and family for a small gathering the following Saturday. I cleaned every room, bought snacks and drinks, and even put out fresh flowers. My parents arrived first with a bottle of wine and a framed photo of me holding my house keys from the day I bought it. My dad walked through every room complimenting my decorating choices, and my mom kept saying how proud she was. Jillian showed up with her husband and a cheese board that must have cost $50. My sister brought her kids, who immediately wanted to explore the backyard. Everyone kept congratulating me on handling everything so well and saying the house was beautiful. Taylor appeared around noon carrying a huge potted plant with broad green leaves. She set it in my living room corner and said it would help purify the air. We talked for a while about the whole situation with Ryan, and she mentioned she'd started warning her other clients about protecting their property information. She said she now tells people to be careful about posting addresses online and to think twice about who they share closing documents with. She'd even created a handout about privacy protection for new homeowners. Taylor said my experience had taught her that people can become obsessed with houses that aren't theirs, especially if there's any past relationship involved. Micah showed up in the early afternoon to check on the security system like he'd promised during installation. He tested all the sensors and cameras to make sure everything was working properly. When he finished, he stayed for the party instead of leaving right away. He complimented how I'd decorated and said the house really reflected my personal taste and hard work. He tried some of Jillian's cheese board and ended up talking with my dad about home security trends for almost an hour. I noticed he seemed comfortable and relaxed, not rushed like he usually was during service calls. The party lasted until evening, and by the time everyone left, I felt genuinely happy in my house for the first time since buying it. Over the next few weeks, I settled into a comfortable routine without any anxiety about Ryan appearing. I stopped checking the security camera footage obsessively. Most days I didn't look at it at all unless I got a motion alert, which was usually just a delivery person or a neighbor walking their dog. The house started feeling like a real home instead of something I had to defend. I rearranged furniture, hung pictures, and made the space completely mine. Work got better too. My boss called me into her office 6 weeks after the restraining order hearing and told me I was getting a promotion to senior regional manager. The raise was significant, almost 15% more than my current salary. She said my ability to handle a difficult personal situation while maintaining professional excellence had impressed the executive team. She specifically mentioned that I'd never let the Ryan drama affect my work performance or my team's productivity. I thanked her and felt genuinely proud of myself. The extra money went straight into my savings account and a dedicated home improvement fund. 3 months after the restraining order was granted, Hunter sent me a text message. He said Ryan had accepted a job in another state and was moving away within 2 weeks. The job was in Arizona, almost 2,000 miles from here. Hunter thanked me for handling everything through legal channels, instead of trying to ruin Ryan's life completely. He said Ryan's therapist had helped him understand why his behavior had been so inappropriate and harmful. The family was relieved he'd be getting a fresh start somewhere else. I didn't respond to the text, but I felt a weight lift off my shoulders knowing Ryan would be that far away. The next day, I got a message from Brittany through social media. She said she'd started dating someone new who actually had his life together and treated her with respect. She thanked me for opening her eyes to Ryan's manipulation, and said she'd learned to watch for red flags much earlier now. She mentioned she'd gone to therapy herself to work through why she'd tolerated Ryan's behavior for as long as she did. Her new boyfriend had a steady job, his own apartment, and didn't try to claim ownership of things that weren't his. She said she wished me well and hoped I was enjoying my house. I sent back a brief message wishing her happiness and thanking her for reaching out. It felt good knowing we'd both moved on from Ryan's chaos. I downloaded a dating app 4 months after everything with Ryan ended. My profile was simple and honest about what I wanted. Someone who had their own life together and understood boundaries. The first few conversations felt awkward because I kept analyzing every message for red flags, but my therapist said that was normal after what I'd been through. I went on 3 dates in the first month. 2 were nice but didn't go anywhere, and the third guy spent the whole dinner talking about his ex-wife's flaws. I politely ended that one early and drove home feeling relieved that I could spot warning signs faster now. The 4th date was with someone named Jacob who worked as an architect and had his own condo downtown. We met for coffee and talked for 2 hours about travel, books, and our careers. He asked thoughtful questions and actually listened to my answers instead of waiting for his turn to talk. When I mentioned I'd recently bought a house, he congratulated me and asked what I loved most about it. No questions about square footage or mortgage rates, just genuine interest in what made me happy. We went on 3 more dates over the next few weeks, and I noticed how different everything felt. Jacob paid for his own meals, showed up when he said he would, and never once suggested improvements to my house or my life. He had his own hobbies, friends, and goals that didn't revolve around me. The biggest difference was how comfortable I felt setting boundaries. When he asked to come over to my house after our 5th date, I said I wasn't ready yet, and he responded with understanding instead of pressure. Jillian texted me on a Friday morning suggesting we take a weekend trip to the beach. She said I deserved to celebrate everything working out and get away from work stress for a few days. I agreed immediately, and we booked a small beach house 2 hours away for the following weekend. The drive down was filled with music and catching up on work gossip. When we arrived at the rental, Jillian opened a bottle of wine and we sat on the deck watching the waves. She brought up the whole Ryan situation unprompted, saying she'd been meaning to tell me how impressed she was with how I handled everything. I thanked her for being there through all of it, especially the early days when I wasn't sure if I was overreacting. She laughed and said I'd been way too patient if anything, and that most people would have called the police after the first unauthorized visit. We spent Saturday walking on the beach and eating seafood at local restaurants. That evening, sitting around a bonfire we'd built in the sand, Jillian made a joke about my house drama being more entertaining than any reality show she'd watched. I laughed because it was true in retrospect, even though living through it had been stressful and scary. She raised her wine glass and said she was glad it was over and I could move forward with my life. We clinked glasses, and I felt genuinely grateful for friends who stuck around during difficult times. The 3rd bedroom had been sitting empty since I moved in, and I finally decided to convert it into a home office like I'd originally planned. I spent a Saturday morning at the hardware store picking out paint in a soft gray color that felt professional but calming. The woman at the paint counter asked if I needed help calculating how much I'd need, and I showed her the room measurements on my phone. She mixed the paint while I gathered supplies including brushes, rollers, and drop cloths. Back at home, I moved the few boxes stored in that room into the garage and laid down the drop cloths. The first coat of paint went on smoothly, and I felt satisfaction with every stroke of the roller. This was my choice, my vision, my house. No one was critiquing my color selection or suggesting alternatives. I took a break for lunch and looked at the half-painted room feeling proud of the progress. The second coat went on that afternoon, and by evening the room looked completely transformed. I ordered a desk online that night along with a comfortable office chair and some shelving units. When everything arrived the following week, I spent an entire Saturday assembling furniture and arranging the space exactly how I wanted it. My laptop sat on the new desk. My books lined the shelves and a small plant sat in the corner by the window. Every single decision had been mine alone, and the room felt like a perfect reflection of what I needed. I checked the security camera footage one evening out of habit more than concern. The recordings showed the mail carrier delivering packages, a neighbor walking their dog past my house, and a delivery truck dropping off the furniture I'd ordered. Nothing unusual or worrying appeared in any of the saved clips. I scrolled back through several days of footage and saw the same normal neighborhood activity. People coming and going from their own homes, kids playing in yards, cars driving by at reasonable speeds. I closed the app and realized I hadn't actually thought about Ryan in weeks, except when something randomly reminded me of how much better my life was now. The constant anxiety about him showing up unannounced had faded completely. I could come home from work without checking my porch first, or worrying about finding him inside. My house felt like a sanctuary instead of something I had to defend. Work had become more enjoyable too without the distraction of ongoing legal drama. I'd been staying late to work on projects I actually cared about instead of rushing home to deal with Ryan-related emergencies. My team had noticed the change in my energy, and several coworkers mentioned I seemed happier and more relaxed. The promotion and raise had given me financial breathing room I hadn't experienced in years. I was saving money again, planning actual vacations and thinking about future home improvements I wanted to make. My parents drove up for Thanksgiving and arrived Wednesday evening with bags of groceries and ingredients for our traditional meal. My mom walked through the house admiring everything I'd done with the space. She loved the paint colors, the furniture arrangement, and especially the new home office. My dad inspected the security system Micah had installed and nodded approvingly at the quality of the equipment. We spent Thanksgiving Day cooking together in my kitchen, which felt spacious enough for all three of us to work without crowding each other. During dinner, my dad raised his glass and said he was proud of me for handling the situation with Ryan like a boss. He specifically mentioned how impressed he was that I'd protected what I worked hard to achieve, instead of letting someone take advantage of my success. My mom added that she'd been worried during the worst of it, but knew I had the strength to get through it. We talked about other family news and upcoming holidays, and the Ryan situation only came up once more when my dad joked about installing even more security cameras. I assured him the current system was more than adequate. They stayed through the weekend, and we spent Saturday decorating for Christmas. My mom helped me pick out a tree, and we set it up in the living room corner. Watching them drive away Sunday afternoon, I felt grateful for their support and proud of the home I'd created. The local homeowners association sent a newsletter in early December inviting residents to a holiday gathering. I normally wouldn't have gone to something like that, but I decided it might be good to meet more neighbors. The meeting was held at someone's house 3 streets over, and about 20 people showed up with appetizers and drinks. I introduced myself to the couple hosting, and they immediately welcomed me, asking which house was mine. When I described the location, several people nodded and said they'd noticed me moving in over the summer. A woman named Nicole, who lived 2 houses down from me, started talking about a reliable handyman she used for small repairs. Another neighbor recommended a lawn service that did excellent work for reasonable prices. A retired couple shared their experience with different contractors they'd used for various home projects. Everyone seemed genuinely friendly and willing to share advice without being pushy or nosy. Nicole invited me to join a group chat where neighbors shared recommendations and warnings about local services. I added my number and immediately saw messages about everything from plumbers to tree removal companies. The sense of community surprised me in a good way. These were people who cared about maintaining their properties and helping each other. I left the gathering with several new contacts in my phone and plans to attend the next association meeting in January. New Year's Eve arrived, and I spent it quietly at home with Jillian and a few other friends. We ordered pizza, played games, and watched the countdown on television. At midnight, I looked around my living room at the people I'd chosen to surround myself with and felt completely content. The restraining order against Ryan was still active and would be for several more months, but I hadn't needed it since he moved to Arizona. Hunter had texted me once in November saying Ryan was settling into his new job and seemed to be doing better with regular therapy. I'd responded with a brief acknowledgement and left it at that. The distance between my old life and my current one felt enormous. 6 months ago, I'd been dealing with daily harassment, unauthorized home invasions, and legal threats. Now I was a homeowner with zero drama, a successful career, supportive friends, and the beginning of a promising relationship with Jacob. My house had become exactly what I'd wanted it to be when I first saw the listing online. A place that was completely mine, filled with my choices, reflecting my personality and my hard work. No one could take that away from me or claim they deserved credit for my success. The letter arrived in mid-January on ordinary white paper with a law firm's return address. I opened it at my kitchen table with my morning coffee and read that Ryan's attorney was writing to inform me Ryan had complied with all terms of our settlement agreement. The letter requested formal confirmation that I considered the matter fully resolved and closed. I took a photo of the letter and texted it to Alyssa asking how I should respond. She called me back within an hour and said this was standard procedure for closing out legal cases. She offered to draft a formal acknowledgement letter that would permanently end any future claims Ryan might try to make. I agreed, and she said she'd have something ready for my review by the next day. The draft arrived in my email that evening. It was professional and clear, stating that I acknowledged Ryan's compliance with the settlement terms and considered all matters between us permanently resolved. The letter specified that no further claims existed, and that Ryan had no current or future interest in my property. Alyssa had included language that would prevent Ryan from ever attempting to reopen the case or make new claims. I read it twice, suggested one minor change to the wording, and approved the final version. Alyssa sent the letter via certified mail to Ryan's attorney, and copied me on the confirmation. Alyssa texted me 2 weeks later suggesting we have lunch to celebrate the official end of the legal matter. We met at a restaurant downtown on a Friday afternoon. She ordered a salad and I got a sandwich, and we spent the first few minutes catching up on non-legal topics. Then she brought up my case and said it had been one of the most straightforward she'd handled in years. I asked what made it so easy compared to her other cases. She explained that most people let their emotions override good judgment, but I documented everything properly from the beginning. The security footage, the saved text messages, the formal demand letters Ryan sent, all of it created an undeniable paper trail that made the case simple to prove. She said many of her clients either don't keep records or wait too long to take legal action, which complicates everything. I thanked her for all her help and said I couldn't have navigated the legal system without her guidance. She smiled and said I'd made her job easy by being organized and following her advice. We finished lunch and she picked up the check, saying it was her treat for a successful case closure. Walking back to my car, I felt a sense of finality that had been missing even after Ryan moved away. I spent the following Saturday shopping for new living room furniture. The couch and chairs I'd been using were the same ones from my apartment days, and they no longer fit the space or my current style. I went to 3 different furniture stores testing out various options. The salesperson at the third store showed me a sectional sofa in a deep blue fabric that felt comfortable and looked perfect for my living room layout. I also found a matching armchair and a coffee table made from reclaimed wood. The total came to more than I'd planned to spend, but I had the money saved and decided to treat myself. The delivery was scheduled for the following week. When the furniture arrived, 2 delivery guys carried everything in and assembled it according to my instructions. I tipped them well, and they left me standing in my living room, looking at the completely refreshed space. The old furniture had gone to a donation center the day before, so the room felt open and new. I rearranged a few decorative items and hung some artwork I'd been saving. By evening, the living room looked like something from a home design magazine. More importantly, it felt completely fresh and free from any association with my past relationship. Every piece in the room was something I'd chosen after Ryan was out of my life. The house had transformed from a place I'd defended against an intruder into a home that reflected who I was becoming. Every piece in the room was something I'd chosen after Ryan was out of my life. The house had transformed from a place I'd defended against an intruder into a home that reflected who I was becoming. A Tuesday morning in late February, Micah rang my doorbell carrying his toolkit and tablet. He explained he was doing routine checks on all the security systems he'd installed in the neighborhood. I invited him in, and he spent 20 minutes testing sensors and checking camera angles. He pulled up the footage history on his tablet and nodded with approval. He mentioned most clients let their systems get dusty or forget to update the software, but everything on mine looked perfect. I offered him coffee since he'd been so helpful during the whole situation with Ryan. We sat at my kitchen table and ended up talking for over an hour about things that had nothing to do with security systems. He told me about hiking trails he'd discovered in the area, and I shared stories about learning to cook new recipes in my kitchen. We both liked the same mystery novels and had similar opinions about the best pizza places in town. Before he left, he asked if I wanted to grab dinner sometime. I said yes without hesitation. Spring arrived gradually with warmer weekends and longer daylight hours. I spent Saturday mornings at the garden center picking out seeds and plants for the yard space I'd imagined when I first bought the house. The previous owner had left the backyard mostly grass with one sad rose bush. I marked out sections for tomatoes, peppers, and herbs near the back fence where they'd get the most sun. Along the side of the house, I planted flowers in shades of purple and yellow. My hands got dirty and my back got sore from digging and planting, but every shovel of soil felt like claiming more of the space as truly mine. The vegetables started as tiny seedlings and grew taller each week. By early summer, I had fresh basil for pasta and ripe tomatoes that tasted better than anything from the grocery store. Each improvement to the yard felt like celebrating everything I'd worked for and protected. One Saturday in June, Jillian came over for a barbecue in my backyard. I'd bought a grill the month before and was still learning how to cook on it properly. She brought potato salad and beer, and we set up chairs on the patio I'd added in April. While the burgers cooked, we talked about work gossip and her new relationship with a guy from her gym. Eventually, the conversation turned to Ryan and everything that had happened. Jillian laughed about how ridiculous his demands had been and pointed out that most people would have caved to his pressure just to make him go away. She said I'd handled the whole situation perfectly by documenting everything and getting lawyers involved instead of trying to reason with someone who refused to be reasonable. She reminded me that I'd come out stronger with a beautiful home that was entirely mine, and a restraining order that proved I wouldn't tolerate nonsense from anyone. 6 months after buying my house, I sat on my back porch one evening watching the sunset and thinking about how far I'd come. My career was going better than ever with the promotion fully established, and another raise already approved for next quarter. My home felt comfortable and safe, with every room reflecting my choices and style. The people in my life respected my boundaries and added value instead of taking from me. The house represented everything I'd worked for through years of saving money and advancing in my career. Nobody could ever take that away from me because I'd built it entirely on my own foundation.